Hi, Marilyn. Good morning. Good morning.
Hi, Kristen.
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me this morning? No.
Sorry, my audio was not turned on my speaker. Sorry, I missed what you said. I'm so
I just
sorry.
said,
How are you?
I just said, were you hearing me?
Oh, yeah. There's something weird with my speaker on my laptop. Every time I'm on a Zoom call, when I hang up, it flips to the other speaker. And so I never know which audio I think everybody can always hear me, but I can't always hear everyone else. So
I had that where if I go from the office to home, sometimes it flips around.
yeah, it's so weird. It's like when I go back and forth. And I have this new light that I just got. I think it's going to be worse than.
All right, I'm gonna go grab my tea.
Yes, in your Wonder Woman cup, I hope.
I know. I think I'm in a KU cup today. So. I was looking at the state things that passed. It looks like we're now going to decriminalize mushrooms.
So I had a conversation. This will be interesting. Maybe we talk about it today. But I had a conversation with someone the other day that said you can't test for it.
Wow.
There's no way to test for, and I don't know, again, I don't know if it's true or not,
Yeah,
but from an OSHA job site safety perspective, it's not like alcohol or marijuana. Apparently there's not testing for it, or there is, but it's like crazy expensive or something.
Oh, goodness.
Or it's invasive, I guess.
It's like, here we go again.
Are we the first state to pass it? Do you know?
I think we may be. I'm not sure on that, but I think we may be.
Well, California or Oregon would be the only two states, if anybody went ahead of us, probably, but. Paul, thank you for facilitating us today.
Good morning. Yeah, no
And
worries.
welcome.
No worries. This is a great subject. I can't wait to hear more about it. How are you this morning? How is everybody? Good morning, Andy. Good morning, Mr. Tom. And to you, Kristen, good morning.
Good morning.
Jason, you're probably running on minimal sleep. You have a very important webinar coming up midday. And so does Kristen's organization. So I was going to promote both of those today so that if folks are interested, they can still join on.
I feel like my remarks at 2 are going to be somewhat similar to the remarks right now. In some ways, but for different reasons. A lot of unknowns.
Well, this is good preparation, right?
A lot of
Hi,
unknowns.
Demir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I know that we had a really good registration for our meeting today, so I think we're going to give everybody 1 minute to get all dialed in and audio connected, and we'll get started.
Good morning, folks.
Good morning, Jason Sharp. How are you?
Good yourself?
Good. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, good to be here. Hi, Jason Todd.
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
Zoom.
Morning, Jason.
Kristen, long time no see.
Yes.
You all missed my fabulous mustache for my Ted Lasso costume. But my wife vetoed the keeping of the mustache, so thus I am clean shaven.
Well, I was going to comment that we're in no shave November, but apparently you shaved in November.
My wife said I'm allowed to grow it back incrementally. It was just the 0 to mustache. That was the thing that she couldn't handle.
Gotcha.
We'll see. My mom's coming in 2 weeks and she really wants to see my face, so we'll see about shaving. Still up in the air.
Well, that you need to definitely please the mom. So
Exactly. Or I could just
You
say I
can-
really want to be like David Scott. And, you know,
If I could grow a mustache and a beard, I would.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we might have a couple more people still either planning to join or maybe still connecting. I know most of you. I'm Marilyn Stansberry, the CEO at IECRM, and welcome to our continuing series of member forums. These have continued to be really popular, and we work really hard to try to bring you topics that are top of mind. We're going to start this morning. We're going to do two things in today's discussion. First, I hope everybody voted. Little late now, but I hope everybody got to voice their support for the candidates of their choice. And this morning, we're going to talk about two things. Jason Todd is the Vice President of Government Relations for IEC National. And Jason Sharp is the CEO, co-owner of Namaste Solar. They have been working very hard to peel back all of the questions and issues and complexities around the Inflation Reduction Act as it relates to energy and the electrical industry. And they're going to talk a little bit about that this morning and try to answer questions, but we also want to still take your questions. What are the things that are questions that you are concerned about? What are questions that aren't clear to you? We started getting calls a few weeks ago, and just about every day we've had a different contractor call and ask an interpretation question. Jason are going to give you an update on where things are and what maybe to expect next. And again, use the chat to post your questions. Or once Jason have had a chance to speak on the topic, we can field questions. Following their presentation, Kristen White from Fisher Phillips is going to be talking about some labor and employment issues, a couple of things that are happening with FAMLI and public options after the first of the year, as well as some other things as we go into the holiday season and you have folks wanting to do community service and volunteer and support charitable events, et cetera. So Jason, I'll let one of you decide who wants to go first in sharing what is the Inflation Reduction Act and why does it matter for our industry? Jason, Todd, do you want to sort of give the high level
Sure.
first?
Sure. So as most of you know, and as Marilyn's prefaced, thanks again for having me here, Marilyn. Never turned down an opportunity early in the morning after Election Day to meet with your members and talk to you about what's going on here in Washington, or what's not, as the case may be. But something is going on, obviously, as the Inflation Reduction Act got passed through Congress through a process known as reconciliation. The process is a arcane process, very wonky process in which legislation can get passed through the House and Senate with simple majorities, avoiding the 60 vote threshold that the filibuster requires in the Senate. The kicker is that the provisions within the bill must be related to a budgetary consideration, so taxing and spending. Can't be just a straight policy provision like, say, just making abortion illegal or illegal. There's no monetary impact to the budget with something like that. So it has to be along those lines, and then there has to be there's a number they pick and how it impacts that. So the congressional Democrats were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act back in August. And in it, when it comes to this in our industry, they passed a number of clean energy provisions and tax incentives for industry to accelerate implementation of different clean energy policies, solar being one of them. There's about 15 or so of them in there. So you get, a taxpayer, a entity who's installing solar panels, upgrading a commercial office building for energy efficiency purposes, those types of things. We can get into which ones are in there if you'd like. They get a tax incentive, a tax deduction, a tax credit for those projects. The real key to the situation is, and most of you are here for, is the fact that there's a bonus deduction that they've included for projects where you pay prevailing wage to the employees working on the project, as well as apprenticeship requirements. So if you pay prevailing wage to the employees on the project in doing the commercial building upgrade, for example, as well as have a certain number of laborers that are apprentices on the job working a certain percentage hours on that job, you then get a bonus deduction that in some cases is the equivalent of, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, about 5 times that of the incentive without paying prevailing wage and without the registered apprentices on the job. So they've made it, incentivized it so that people are apt to pay prevailing wage and have registered apprentices on the job. The political bent to this is to basically throw this work over to unionized contractors. The idea being is that a unionized contractor, the union can take care of a lot of the compliance issues that oftentimes come with the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements on a federal contract, of which it's not clear how those, if at all, apply in this situation, which is probably one of your first questions. But that's sort of the dynamic. It's also written in such a way in a union context, in the sense that it's surmised that a taxpayer / contractor, whomever's getting this tax benefit or doing the work, would go down to the union or a place where registered apprentices are, like the union hiring hall, and to see if there are any registered apprentices available to work on the job. Obviously, in our context, that's not how we work with our members employing the apprentices and doing classroom work at the chapter like IECRM. So that's another complication with regards to how it's worked. So that's sort of a high level overview of what the provisions that I've been focusing on with regards to the IRA. And I'll turn it over to Jason to kind of give a little bit more of whatever he's thinks with regards to his specific business and how he views it as a actual IEC member.
Am I allowed to share a screen? Can you guys see my screen? Yep. Cool. So for people looking for more information, SEIA is the National Solar Trade Industry. It's the Solar Energy Industries Association. And SIA has lots of information on these things. In our opinion, as a small local business, we believe SIA is more big business, and they don't always represent the interests of the small. They try to represent all the solar industry, but we think the small contractors are sometimes left out of their priorities. But anyway, they have some great information. They are often aligned with our interests, and they are a good organization. So we do often align with SIA. I just wanted to point out some of the specifics of what this means. This is there's two tax codes, right? There's residential tax code 25D, and then there's section 48 of the tax code, which impacts businesses. And so the credits for businesses, section 48 and 25D are different. So section 25D is residential. You can see here that prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, the credit in 2022 was a 26% tax credit, going to 22 in 2023, and then gone for residential homeowners. So the solar industry was facing a significant challenge in viability past 2023. You can see under the IRA, it's an historic funding runway. 30% was what it was prior to 2022. So they've restored the 30% tax credit and extended that for residential homeowners through 2032, now stepping down to 26 and 22 to 0 in 2035. So the hope is that we'll substantially meet goals. Solar will be an equal pillar of energy and won't need support after that point in time. That's sort of the concept of these, is to create a new industry and give them the support they need to stand on their own 2 feet to be long-term successfully. I mean, the oil and gas industry, could argue, has had over a century of support to establish itself as a dominant energy supplier. So that's sort of the concept. So you can see how significant this tax credit extension is and how long it is. And market stability is something markets like a lot. Oh, one thing before I show you commercial. The other really big change here is standalone storage is now also, you can get a tax credit for standalone storage. So you can just install storage on a home as a backup energy system and receive a tax credit. And that's a significant change for the industry. Second thing I'd say that really impacts electrical contractors is this idea of electrification. So high efficiency electric home rebates. There was 4.275 billion going to states to stand up rebate programs for home electrification. And I gave a presentation at National about why electrification is so desirable. Homeowners are going to want these things because they're fantastic technology, not because there's a rebate. They're the most efficient way to heat and cool a home ever invented. So I think you're going to see market demand just from consumer interest, yet alone the government trying to help make them more cost effective. But you can see these are substantial rebates. States get to decide what the actual rebate programs will be. This is the federal government's maximum rebate, but you can see a heat pump is up to $8,000 in a rebate, depending on what the state decides. City of Denver currently has a heat pump rebate as well. So you can imagine we're talking significant financial support for electrification. Electric wiring, maybe that's a service upgrade for your home. So a lot of electricians do service upgrades. A lot of electricians do electric load centers. So maybe you're a $4,000 rebate to do a service upgrade at a home to prepare a house for electrification. So significant investment in home electrification is the other piece. So this is not just a solar climate thing. This is an electrification climate thing, and electrification is what we do. So in my opinion, this is a pretty exciting time to be an electrician. It might be I was thinking the other day, this might be the greatest time to be an electrician since the invention of a light bulb. Might be the last time it was most transformative to add an electric appliance to a home. So then it might be grandiose, but that's, in my mind, I'm excited about being an electrician. So anyway, commercial is different. So I told you there's two types of tax code, section 25D and section 48. So the commercial ITC is different. And this is what Jason Todd was speaking to with prevailing wage requirements. The break point is 1 megawatt. So a project less than a megawatt does not have prevailing wage. And you can see there's a 30% base for projects less than a megawatt, but then you can get adders. So there's a domestic manufacturing requirement. We're trying to stimulate American manufacturing. So there's a bonus adder for domestic manufacturing to incentivize purchasing American-made products. There's a bonus for energy communities, and energy communities are like Superfund sites, retired coal plants. There's a lot of different places around Colorado. They're still making laws on what counts as an energy community, but you could get a 50% tax credit if you were building a project on an energy community with American-made material. So really trying to stimulate brownfields and Superfund sites and reinvigorating land that's been spoiled and reclaiming that for energy manufacturing. And then on top of that, there's a low income community adder as well. So if you're serving low income community markets, you can get either a 10% or even a 20%, depending on the how your project's put together. So you add it all up, you can go anywhere from 30 to 70% tax credit if you hit all the adders. So it's going to be a mad dash in the next 2 years. They're in rulemaking right now, trying to define energy communities and domestic content and low income, and all of those rules are what Treasury is doing right now. So that's why down below you see what's available 60 days after versus 60 days before. So this is less than 60 days. And down here, it's for after 60 days. And the way that they're doing it on the large scale projects is the base credit for a project over a megawatt's only 6%. If you conform with the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And I think it's 10% of the work product or the labor hours on a project has to be done by registered apprentices in the first year, 12.5%, I think, in the second year, and then it's 15% of all the labor on a project needs to be done by registered apprentices for every year thereafter. So it's 6% without apprentices and prevailing wage. You get 24% more if you are meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And then you can add on these additional bonuses for domestic manufacturing and energy communities and low income. So over a megawatt is where the apprenticeship and prevailing wage requirements are added. And Jason, Todd, and I, along with several other folks, have been put together comments to the Treasury to try to make sure access to apprenticeship and prevailing wage was clarified. I don't think it's as big as a problem in Colorado as it is in some other states around the country where we don't have as balanced of a merit shop access to Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage jobs as Colorado does. But some states are a lot more freaked out than we are, but we're trying to influence those rules. They'll issue preliminary rules. I don't know, Jason, if you know how long, but Treasury will submit preliminary rules, and then we'll get to comment on the actual rules before they go into place, and then there'll be 60 days before they implement after those rules are finalized. So we'll get another bite at the apple, so to speak, to try to influence rulemaking once the Treasury comes back with their first draft.
Okay, and Jason, that was going to be one of my questions, just in terms of timeline for the current round of comments and timeline in sort of calendaring, because this takes place in 2023. How does the timeline sort of play out with the process?
First comments were due last week, and we submitted and collaborated and submitted. I got some feedback from Brandon, a few other folks. We put together comments with Sonova, and I talked to Sia and COSA and a bunch of folks in Amicus. So anyway, those comments all went in last week. I don't know how long till Treasury releases. Jason probably knows better than I. And then we'll have X days
Right.
between when they release those to make our final comments.
So I guess the the best way to characterize it is these the policies within the IRA could take effect as early as around March, I think would be the most aggressive time frame for purposes of implementation if they were get them in by the beginning of the year, 60 days, 2 months, if they were going to be very aggressive about it. So that's probably an aggressive timeline to go final. But that's on the early end.
And then another question from the comments was about using domestic products. What engagement, if any, have manufacturers had in being able to provide American-made products? Like, how challenging is that now? And where do you see that being a challenge in the future?
It depends on how you define the components or subcomponents that make up the product. You know, is it assembled in America? Is it significantly modified in the United States? Is it raw material needs to be here? So there's a ton of things that are going to be determined in rulemaking. And yes, manufacturers, at least in the solar industry, but the racking industry, steel manufacturing, you know, there's a lot of horses in the race around what we call domestic manufacturing. They'll fall back on like Buy America rules, et cetera, but we're still waiting. Yeah, so Mike Kruger mentioned that there's already announcements around factory expansion. SEIA is taking a very strong approach that there's a lot more things could count as domestic manufacturing if you don't consider the raw material of the cell itself. And so if you could import the raw material, but then significantly modify that raw material in the United States, that would count. And that's what they're pushing hard for, but we'll see what the government says.
I only know a little bit to be dangerous. I don't know a whole lot, but they put a Buy America provision in the it wasn't the IRA, but a similar provision to what's in the IRA. The Buy American provision was enacted, but now they've been walking a lot of that back, recognizing supply chain issues and other issues with regards to just basically complying with something that is actually from the US, getting so far down into the aggregate of products and their ability to be sourced in the US. So they're basically implemented this Buy America provision, and now they're kind of slowly basically walking all that back through rulemaking and through various rules and decision making. So they're recognizing the impracticality of implementing a lot of these, you know, politically appealing made in America type provisions, when we all really know that nothing is purely made in America 100% these days, you know, with much of the components coming from overseas. So it remains to be seen how that really gets implemented.
And it's another challenge to the workforce. So you want to expand manufacturing and production in the United States across industries that are already challenged with workforce. So that, I mean, just another element, and someone has to construct this expansion, and someone has to work in the product development. Mike Kruger, I know that you've been, go ahead, Jason.
So I just wanted to call out one other thing. One big thing that we're pushing for as small businesses and Amicus is looking for is right now, because there's a difference in the tax codes between 25D and 48. If you're a homeowner and buy American made product, there's no benefit to you. And if you are a homeowner who lives in an energy community, or you've built you have a 25D tax, you're a taxpayer of 25D, you don't get any of the adders. So if you're a low income community member buying American made product, putting a solar system in your neighborhood, that's a low income neighborhood, you get 30%, but a corporation who comes in and does that for you, they get all these adders. So it's sort of treating corporations better than they're treating people. And we believe that people are equal and should be treated equally under the tax code. And so we're pushing for an additional change to this, hopefully legislatively, and would be looking for support, and hopefully the IEC could support, because we think 80% of the jobs in the solar industry come from small businesses like Namaste Solar and members of IEC. We're the job creators, and to leave us out of, leave homeowners out of, and leave small businesses out of these additional provisions, we think is an oversight. So we'll be looking for support in running a bill to try to create some parity between the benefits corporations are receiving and the benefits that homeowners are receiving. So we'll be looking for help on that, just FYI.
Excellent. And Mike Kruger with COSA, the Colorado Solar Storage Association, has been adding some additional comments in the chat function on the call today. And Mike, I don't want to call on you unnecessarily, but Mike, is there anything else that you want to add? Because I know you and your members and many of the members like Namaste or crossover between our associations. Is there anything that you'd like to share from COSA's perspective that brings additional information into where we are with IRA?
Sorry, I'm on the
And Mike-
train, so yeah, it's it'll maybe a little background noise, but I think the thing that IRA does is in Colorado gives strong tailwinds to where we were already going from some laws we passed in 2019. And what it doesn't address, and I think you got on this earlier, is workforce. And there's various state and some federal effort to train up folks in the electric power sector, but it doesn't. You know, we are extremely limited in the number of boots on the roof and boots in the field. So I think that is probably one area which will be a natural break on this rollout. But really, the other thing I'd point out is that this is a pretty bipartisan policy. The energy communities that we talked about, that's going to be like Weld County, that's going to be Craig, it's going to be Pueblo, it's going to be some parts of the Western Slope, which all will have a history in extraction and will all benefit and get additional investment and jobs. So this isn't something I think that, and I know we're still trying to digest yesterday's election, but I don't think we're going to see this become a political football in the way that we've seen other, whether it's Trump tax breaks or Obamacare or whatever. And so I think there is some certainty for the IECRM members and certainly for COSA members that you have a decade to go as fast as you can go because customer demand is through the roof, whether that's rooftop residential or whether that's utility scale. You now have state and federal policies that make this probably as cheap as it's ever going to be. And as fast as you can hire folks, you can make long-term plans in the solar space and the energy storage space to build your business. So that would be what I think my thoughts on this are.
Thank you, Mike. Jason, before we segue to our other topic, I want to open it up for a few questions. Does anybody have any questions? One question is, can you comment on changes to 179D? Is that something that someone can take? And if not, we'll list that as a question and get back.
What is 179D?
179D is the tax tax deduction for energy efficiency upgrades to commercial buildings. I can send along what CRS, Congressional Research Service, has about the different provisions and increase in the tax deduction that you get for 179D upgrades when you pay prevailing wage and use registered apprentices. That's not a problem. I don't have them off the top of my head. I mean, I can read them here, but you do get an increased deduction, and it's this complicated sort of way it gets calculated, I believe, from what I've read. So I can send that along. That's not a problem, Scott.
Okay. Wonderful. And we are recording the session today, and we'll be sending out links that were referenced along with notes. So Jason, anything that you share, we will be happy to include in the packet that goes out to all the participants and to those that registered. So one of the questions, do state level apprenticeship programs count or just federal ones? And this is actually one of the questions that I wanted to understand and explore. And Mike, I think that for the purposes of the audience, So right now, Colorado is a federal registered apprenticeship program. We are the largest apprenticeship program in the state of Colorado across all industries, and clearly the largest electrical apprenticeship program. So companies that aren't already aligned, that aren't already members of IEC, independent contractors, have been reaching out to us to join so that they can then enroll in the registered apprenticeship program to meet these eligibility requirements. Colorado, like other states, Colorado is going through the process right now of converting from a federal registered apprenticeship program to oversight by a state apprenticeship council. So the state would then oversee the apprenticeship programs. And there are about half the states in the country that are state apprenticeship programs. The rest are under that direct oversight of the federal government. We're in the process right now of standing up that agency to handle apprenticeship programs. It will be sometime next summer before the plan goes to the feds and gets approved for the state to be able to administer all of the existing federal programs. It's supposed to be seamless in that anything is grandfathered in from the feds to the state. And then it also allows new programs to be developed. So the big picture answer should be that it's state and federal programs, because the state programs would have to meet the federal requirements in order for them to be approved as a state apprenticeship program. Jason, I don't know if that was raised in the comments or if there's been any need for clarification. That's the way that I currently see it for existing programs. And then I can talk specifically about things that IEC wants to do for future planning.
In the IRS and Treasury's request for comments on the questions that they listed, they referenced state apprenticeship agencies. So in their request, I didn't go back to the bill of text to answer this question. I can't remember completely about what the bill of text law specifically says, but based off those questions that I've pretty much poured over the past month or so, they asked questions about things like what could be used to document an apprentice, and they reference specifically state apprenticeship agencies as well as Rapids, which is a database that our chapters enter into for federal apprenticeships, but states conceivably will have their own similar Rapid system, I'm assuming, Marilyn.
Yes,
that you guys will then
is,
have once you go to the state apprenticeship model. So yes, that's the short answer.
Yes, well, and sort of getting into the weeds of the systems, many of the state apprenticeship councils, state apprenticeship agencies that have taken over the oversight of apprenticeship programs in the last few years they're still using Rapids to enter their data, because it keeps it consistent for the federal reporting that the states are required to do back to the feds. It's a little bit of extra layer for states to have to do, but most of them are using Rapids, or they're using systems that have been created that can export and import data into Rapids. So I think it's still going to be that base of data collection. I did speak with a contractor yesterday related to apprenticeship programs the company is headquartered in another state. They have an electrical division that is headquartered in Colorado, but they do state and even global work in the solar industry. So they're trying to figure out from state to state how they track apprenticeship hours when they hire people from, let's say, Illinois to work on a project in Texas for a period of time. And then that person lives in Illinois, but they work in Texas until the project is done, and then they move to another place. And so it's that tracking of hours that for companies that truly are pretty much 100% travel. So they were trying to get clarification on, can I transfer from a registered apprenticeship program in one state to a registered apprenticeship in another state, keeping it all on track with Rapids, or can one state handle the administration of an apprenticeship program? So they're trying to figure out sort of in those weeds as well. And Mike mentioned earlier about workforce and training. We are working right now on a partnership with COSA and a couple of other organizations to be able to to potentially in the future get a solar apprenticeship or an expansion of our program to offer solar classes approved so that we can help with this specific training demand in the years to come. So more on that. It's right now in discussion phases so that we can look at curriculum and see what offerings we have. Jason.
One of the weird things that in my conversation with Brandon at LEI, he actually highlighted for me, and it helped me craft comments to the Treasury, is that normally if you have like a prevailing wage Davis-Bacon project for like a federal government, you're doing certified wages through an agent, basically. Like you have to submit weekly payroll and they oversee labor codes and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole certified wage program that's associated with a certified wage, with a prevailing wage project. The weird thing about this is these are going to be private sector projects with Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements, but there's no certified wage oversight. So that's part of why they're trying to understand how to report whether or not people are compliant with Davis-Bacon and how they report apprenticeship, because a certified wage, you can go check if somebody's registered or not. Like there's a lot more structure around it. So these are private sector projects without certified wage. So you're not reporting wages to anybody on a weekly basis. There's no administrator that you're working with. But if you get audited, you better have the paperwork behind it. And so, you know, I think as people get into it, like make sure you have the paperwork to protect yourself if you are audited. But we are advocating for, and C is advocating for, and several others, that you should simply have something simple on your tax form that shows the apprentice hours that worked, the total hours on the project, and an affidavit that you paid Davis-Bacon wages. And then if you get audited, you would need to provide the additional paperwork behind that. So we think a simpler is better kind of approach. Sorry, Paul, what'd you say?
That would be approved training as well and tracked.
Yes.
Not just on the job training, right? So if you take a look at the Office of Apprenticeship standards, you know, the tons of check boxes that got to be made. And if you're doing any of those, say, public sector type of work, it states in there that you're in a program and in school the entire time. So yeah, it'd be interesting, and hopefully we can come up with something that we can throw out there and say, here's at least a start, right?
Yeah, and I think what contractors do and what is required for submittal to the federal government are going to be separate. And thinking about CYA, if you get audited, because to Mike's point, the penalties are significant. So those are the things for us to think about, is how much do we want the government to dictate the requirements you need on the front end side of the tax form by the taxpayer, and then what do we want as contractors to make sure that we're doing the right things on our behalf to make sure we're compliant. So it's going to be a little muddy, unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons we're waiting for rulemaking. But those are some of the things we try to comment on the first round. Well,
and remember too, Mike said, you know, there's already some things that have happened in Colorado, whether we liked it or not. We now are required, all contractors are required to report apprentice hours through our program, whether you're part of the registered apprenticeship program or not. But if they're in school, contractors are required to report all apprentice hours. If they're in our program, we have a mechanism to be able to do that. So contractors having to report all OJT hours and report them to the state on an annual basis now anyway. So if contractors are complying with that aspect of it, they would be able to deal with half of it in terms of apprenticeship hours worked. It's then that other piece of the Davis, you know, the pay side of it. So,
and
any
Marilyn,
other questions?
One
Yes.
other point I was just going to bring up to people that maybe they're aware of, maybe they're not, is the fact that they included a good faith estimate for good faith effort for purposes of obtaining an apprentice for the job to meet the requirements, which they were requesting how that should be defined, which we pushed back and just provided a lot of scenarios of which kind of call out what a good faith estimate would look like. So it's really not clear how you would prove a good faith estimate, what sort of effort you'd have to go in to find an apprentice, to say you don't have an apprentice, that you recruited them, that sort of thing. The idea is, again, back to the union model where you're a contractor and you go down to the hiring hall and they don't respond to you. That's a very specific sort of set of circumstances that is very easy to pinpoint. And that's where their line of thinking was going, whereas with us, it's a little bit different. How did you recruit? What did you do? How did you, what kind of efforts and steps did you make to try to satisfy a good faith estimate? If you couldn't find them theoretically and you met that, then you could go about the project, qualify for the tax credit or tax deduction without meeting the apprenticeship requirements if you demonstrated a good faith estimate, which is yet to be defined.
Well, I know that we will have multiple conversations about this between now and March and likely beyond as it's implemented. And I appreciate everybody listening in and adding your questions. If there is anything that you think of along the way, please do email me or email Paul, and we'll make sure that we're learning as we go along with you. So if you have the questions, someone else likely has it as well. And we don't know what we don't know in the field implementation perspective. So we're happy to take on your questions and try to get answers. Jason and Jason, thank you both so much. You're so knowledgeable about so many things in the industry, but I appreciate you taking the time to participate. Jason Todd has a post-election webinar scheduled at noon our time, 2 p.m. Eastern. If anybody is interested in that information, put it in the chat and we'll make sure that you get the link to be able to sign up and register. And Jason, you do need to be a National PAC sponsor in order to be able to attend. Is that correct?
No, that was more of an enticement to get people to become, as we call it, PAC authorized. It's a soft requirement, so to speak. I'll post in the chat the link to sign up for the webinar. But Perfect. Real quickly, to Marilyn's point, there's an arcane requirement to donate to our political action committee that you fill out a form. It's just your contact information. It's nothing crazy. And then we can solicit you for money and contributions to the PAC, but you're not obligated. So that's a very brief explanation of that. And I'll post a link to the registration for the webinar, but I appreciate that, Marilyn.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to introduce Kristen White. Kristen is a partner with Fisher Phillips and an attorney at law extraordinaire. Most of you know that she's been along with us pretty consistently since COVID started, and she's been very gracious to continue to keep us updated on labor and employment issues and other things we need to know. So Kristen, I know we haven't given you much time, but I'm going to let you hit the highlights, and we'll have you on again as well.
Sure, no worries. That was an interesting discussion, so no problem. The biggest one I want to mention, we've talked about a couple times, is family, the state family medical leave insurance that's hitting as of January 1, 2023. So what came out this week on CDLE's website is they put out a poster and are reminding all employers that you have to notify your employees as of January 1, 2023 about family. So you can do that, with this poster that they've got on their website that you put up with your other posters. I mean, remember when HFWA first came out and there was a new poster you had to put up. We also recommend you put some language in your handbooks when you're doing your updates, in order to give the notice. And the program, the poster that they've put out is, pretty detailed. Well, I'll get kind of the highlights, but it's pretty detailed on what it is. So, I mean, the first part's going to be as of January 1, 2023, all employers in Colorado have to start withholding a certain percentage of income. So if you're below 10 employees, it's just that 0.45%. If you're above 10, it's going to be that 0.9, which you can split between employer and employee. Meaning you can withhold from the employees 0.45 and you, the employer, pay 0.45. It's going to be submitted at the end of a quarter. So the first one will be due April 30th, 2023. And they're envisioning it's going to be just like how you submit your unemployment insurance and how you submit those quarterly payments. That's how they're envisioning it will be submitted online at the end of each quarter with like you do your unemployment. Now, they were supposed to have, starting last month, where you would go on and actually register your business in order to, be able to start doing this. I could not find on the website where that is live yet. I did find where they're advertising that the week of December 5th, they're going to have a bunch of webinars to actually show you how to register your business. So if you've got questions on that, look at the CDLE website, and they're going to put some webinars on that week of December 5th. They'll have some live, and then they'll also do recordings. And I've watched some of the recordings. They're actually pretty easy to follow. So don't worry if you can't make the exact time. But so my guess is based on that they've not gone live yet with how to register your business. But if someone else has found that, let us know, because I could not find it on the website. But you've got to be ready. You want to make sure if you have a third-party payroll administrator that they're ready to go as of January 1, and everything's ready to go. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a private plan option. What they've said is you can offer a private plan, meaning kind of paid family medical leave, but you have to meet all the requirements of this new law. And the way it's going to work is that next year you will still make deductions and submit to the state. And sometime next fall, they're saying next October, you would apply to have your plan recognized by the state. And then they would actually refund the money to you starting 2024. I know we all kind of laugh, like, really, are they going to refund the money? But that's what they're saying, how the private plan is going to work. Now, remember, 2023 is when we're going to start making the withholdings. Both for most people, employer and employee side. You can choose as an employer to make the full withholding. So keep that in mind. Some employers are doing that. But starting 2024 is when employees can actually start using the benefit and applying to the state to get, the wage replacement, which right now, is set at 90% of their weekly wage, obviously depending on how much they make. For most of your employees, they're not going to get 90% because they're making too much. But there is a calculator online as well that shows that maximum. So one of the big things in your handbook is if you are an employer above 50 employees, so you're subject to FMLA, the federal law, you need to put in your handbooks that the leave under both these laws run concurrently, right? We want that to be very clear. So employees aren't thinking that they get 12 weeks under FAMLI and then 12 weeks under FMLA, right? So these are state and federal laws. They can run concurrently. So you want to make sure you get that language in your handbooks because the way it is worded here is it can run. So you as the employer have got to give notice to the employees that it's going to run concurrently if you're subject to FMLA, meaning you're over 50 employees. So I was looking here, those are really the highlights. It's a really low burden for an employee to qualify to start taking the benefits in 2024. They only have to have earned $2,500 over the previous year for work in Colorado. So that's not $2,500 for you. So this could be a brand new employee that takes this leave. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that they have to work for you for 180 days to be entitled to return to the same position. So those of you familiar with FMLA are familiar with that. Once they take the leave, you return them to the same position. They do have to work for you for at least 180 days to get that benefit. However, you can't fire someone for taking this leave, right? So, there is a retaliation provision in the law as well. So again, kind of just hitting the high points. But yeah, just keep that in mind that, either if you're doing these deductions or you have a third party payroll administrator, that they're ready to go starting January 1. Since the state has, delayed up until the last minute, getting everybody registered, what that's going to look like. So I'll pause there because I think that's kind of the biggest change in Maryland coming as of January 1, just to see if anyone's got questions on that change. I know we've been talking about it. It's finally getting here, so. Okay.
Questions? Everybody ready for January 1?
We'll see what the legislature throws at us next year. I was looking at the elections, so.
Yeah.
The other thing that's out there that is still hanging out there, I want to make sure it's still on people's radar, is secure savings. That was supposed to go live this year. And when I was looking that up this week, they talk about that registration will start in 2023. So the state is clearly not ready and has not been ready. This is the program that essentially says that if you as a private employer do not offer like a 401k program for your employees, that employees can basically get an IRA through a state sponsored program. So it's not really a cost to you other than some administrative burden as far as pulling the money out and sending it to the state fund. But one thing to keep in mind, and assuming that it follows what the law said it was supposed to be, is it will be an opt-out system for your employees. So when you're doing new hire training, you'll have to train your employees. And if they do not want money to be coming out for the state IRA, assuming you don't have a private plan and you get this exemption, they will have to opt out. And my guess is that will be what it looks like, because that was one of the key parts of the law, is they want more people to be saving for retirement. That's why it's an opt-out, because they find more people will just leave it in instead of opting out. So just keep that in mind, that that's out there. Once it does go live in 2023, which they haven't told us what month yet, you may have to make some handbook updates and some notices to your employees at that time, but that still is out there. So like I said, they were supposed to get that going this year and just haven't done it. The next thing I was going to mention was something Marilyn had talked about, was we do have a wage and hour. We do wage and hour webinars on Wednesday. So if you're not signed up for those and you deal with the wage and hour issues, I can help you get signed up on our website and you get notice of those. But this Wednesday, so today, I think it's at 10 Mountain, they're actually covering parties, charity events, volunteer events, and how do you keep those from being compensable? There's a few different avenues here. One is from wage and hour, how do we keep that we don't have to pay somebody for the time they spend at our party? And it really comes down to, was this outside normal working hours? Was attendance voluntary? And by voluntary, I mean truly voluntary. You don't have the boss saying, we really would like you to come, everyone's going, right? And that the employee doesn't do any actual productive work during that party. So one of the things that can happen is, do you have an administrative assistant that ends up helping you set up the food, right? She's working. This is compensable time, depending on if they're hourly or salary, right? So just keep that in mind. That's what they're going to cover. The other part I'd mention from a voluntary perspective, because we've seen this on the workers' comp and the OSHA side, is we've had employees get injured at parties. We had a barbecue go wrong, right? And we had employees get severely injured. So it does happen. And then the whole issue became, was this truly voluntary? Meaning, did we have to put it on our OSHA logs? Did we have to report to OSHA? What about workers' comp? Was this going to be a covered injury? So I think today they're just going to focus on it from the wage and hour perspective of, making sure that this work activity or this non-work activity is not compensable, but just keep in mind there's other issues there too. The last one I was going to mention here, Marilyn, we did pretty good getting this all in the time. I know I'm going pretty fast.
You're doing great.
No, actually two things. I was going to mention two more things. We've talked a lot about the unemployment notice, right? So when people leave employment, termination, or resignation, you have to be giving them a written notice about, their name, their wages. There's like 4 or 5 things, but basically here's how to qualify for unemployment benefits. The other part that we noticed, and this came up just last week, is that another new part of this law is that it used to be the law in Colorado that if you paid somebody severance, that delayed their unemployment benefits. Now that is not the law if the severance includes a waiver of claims. And as your employment lawyer, I would always ask you, why are you giving someone severance money without including a waiver of claims? Because that's part of the benefit, right? Is I'm going to pay you some money. You're going to agree not to sue me. We're all going to go our separate ways. That waiver of claims that and this was, again, something else kind of snuck in the unemployment regs at the last minute, that no longer delays unemployment benefits because it has a waiver. So essentially an employee can now double dip. So when they go to leave your employment, if you pay them 6 months of severance and it includes a waiver, then they could apply for unemployment and get unemployment, and they can double dip for those 6 months. So I have no idea, to talking to Marilyn, how they snuck this in the law. And again, it was just like the unemployment notice. I mean, this is an incredible double dip for people to be able to get severance benefits and unemployment, because as I said, as an employment lawyer, I would always say the waiver is still worth more than the unemployment, right? At the end of the day, a waiver of claims will save you more than unemployment, because a lawsuit, as we know, is much more expensive than unemployment. So if you had to choose, I would choose that. But it started making us think internally, well, is there a way to just keep someone on your payroll while you pay them severance, so they're still a quote employee and they can't get unemployment? I mean, maybe there's some ways to be creative, but just be aware that change has happened as well. And the last thing I'll mention is another wage and hour issue. As you know, the comps order comes out every year. You have to put it on your handbooks. They make little changes each year. Make sure that you're reviewing that each January. But one of the things that is coming up is, as of starting in January 1, is that if you're going to make deductions from wages, like someone leaves you and they don't return their uniform or their equipment, in Colorado, you've got to have that based on a separate signed agreement. So not just language in your handbook that says, when you leave, we're going to deduct anything you don't return. That's not enough in Colorado law. You've got to have a separate document that they've signed where they agree you can make a wage deduction for those tools and equipment and uniform if they don't return them. But now, starting next year, you also need to give written notice to the employees before you make that deduction from their wages. So they've signed an agreement, and now we're giving them written notice. And that will be in the new comps order about what all that notice needs to entail. So I've got a colleague here that will, and he's talked to you a few times, Micah Dawson. He will always tell you wage deductions are never worth it. But there is legal ways to do it, but it is risky. And it's getting riskier here in Colorado with our CDLE, our Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. They do not like wage deductions. So they are going to continue to make it harder for you to make those. So the more you're able to get that equipment, tools, uniforms before someone leaves and not make the wage deduction, the safer it is, even though I know that's not always possible. But we
Kristen,
do send,
I was going to say, is there a reference or a link or something that you could provide that we could share this out? Because I am imagining from our contractor perspective that this could be pretty impactful.
Okay.
I want to make sure that this is something that they're aware of for all of the various nuances that might exist in the construction trade,
right,
with safety equipment, with other things that might have been issued to an employee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. What I'll do is I'll get the link, Marilyn, and then kind of can reference when you send out that email, which part of the comps order for you.
Perfect.
Yeah, because that is becoming harder and harder to do. I mean, we have, there's companies now that all they do, and we've hired them a few times for clients, all they do is go to people's houses and pick up stuff. So they drive out to the house, they pick up a computer or equipment. I've had dirty shirts mailed back to me. So there are ways to get equipment back without wage deductions. Like I said, there's companies now that's all they do every day is drive around and pick up things from, former employees' houses.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you'd be amazed.
So there's a question, and I will add on. What about wage deductions for health insurance that was already being deducted weekly for the remainder of the month? Like, at what point do you?
That would be separate, right? So that the employee has elected benefits. And so that's where you have those signed documents, right? The employee's gone in and they have elected to have their wage deducted for their health insurance benefits, right? And that usually runs at that weekly or runs, on a monthly basis. So yeah, so the employee has affirmatively elected this. So this is where, either they haven't signed a document that said they're going to make it, or we're trying to deduct something that they haven't returned when they left. So yeah, health insurance would be, since they've elected that'd be like, they've elected their 401k, and obviously regular taxes that have to come out.
Sure. So what about in our apprentice programs where we have a contractor that might pay the tuition for the individual and then take a little bit out of their check each week or each month to pay the company back for having prepaid for their tuition. And some of them then will deduct the remainder of the tuition if the employee leaves voluntarily. You know, they may take it out of their final check, and we know that they can't take it out less than what minimum wage would be. But would that kind of notice and agreement apply to tuition expense or
It
book
would.
expense?
It would, yes. You want to have, if you're doing the tuition, we see that a lot, have that separate written agreement. And I believe the notice would still apply on that because it's still going to be a wage deduction that you're making right after. So yeah, so you
Right.
want the written agreement and the notice.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions I see, David, you've asking about large employers have to show the state that we have a 401k. From what I can tell, yes, it looks like with Secure Savings, because they talked about, and there's not a whole lot out on it yet, that you will have to somehow show the state that you have a program. And I don't know if that's going to be like a registering it, if it's going to be just going in and clicking that we have it and we're exempt. It looks like though there will be some process to show the state that you're providing something already for your employees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, at least from what I can tell right now.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little bit, a minute or so over. I respect everybody's time. Does anybody, if you need to leave, we will be sending out the notes. But does anybody have any additional questions of Kristen or things that you want to share or ask of us? All right, gone. Thank you so much, everyone. Kristen, Jason, and Jason, appreciate your time this morning. Jason Sharp, I will see you next week to talk more about energy codes and electrification. Looking forward to that. Come have lunch with us next Wednesday at noon. We're going to do a town hall to expand on some of these energy and electrification topics. With that, everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for the update, everybody.
Jordan, good to
Welcome.
see
Thank you.
Jay, good to see
Thank
you.
you.
Good seeing
Thanks,
you guys.
Carolyn. Bye-bye.
Paul, who is in the office with you? I can't tell.
That is Mr. David Jones.
David Jones,
Hi.
fan club.
I went from one meeting and I was driving and I thought this is the closest place to log on. So here I am.
Good for you. Well, we like it when you are in the building. When David Jones is in the house, that's a good thing.
Well, Paul's telling me that I missed quite a good meeting, so hopefully I'll be able to watch the video on it.
Yes. In fact, we are still recording now. So